word of wisdom is a health code unique to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Often known by the name Mormons, members of this Christ-centered faith have been living this code of health since just after the religion's founding in 1830. Spiritually guided health codes are not uncommon for religious groups. Most famously, perhaps, is the Jewish Law of Moses, which has been practicing prohibition on foods such as shellfish and pork, as well as standards of cleanliness for thousands of years. We are familiar today with the admonition, all things in moderation. Though commonly attributed to the Bible, the phrase is best regarded for the Greek poet Hesiod, 700 years before Christ. Moderation is an old idea, the sentiment being suggested by even the wise King Solomon, as recorded in the book of Ecclesiastes.
I said to myself, "Come, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done, and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This, I see, is from the hand of God, for without him, who can eat or find enjoyment?
Moderation in all things is also a code of health. A law of health can be a form of worship, a preparation for the soul as well as the body. For many, like the Jews of olden days, there is a temporal salvation to be discovered, blessing the faithful with greater health, energy, and wisdom, longer life, and quality of living. Because of their law of health, most Jews of ancient times probably avoided many ills of the day, such as parasites and digestive problems. A good example is the story of Daniel, along with his companions Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These were Israelite prisoners of Babylon, who were specially selected to serve the king because of their health and intellect. They were given the best education and also food of Babylon, but the food was rejected by these men. They knew it was in violation of the spiritual law they had received from the prophets of God. In the end, Daniel and his friends remained faithful to their code of health and were healthier than their Babylonian counterparts, as well as much wiser, able to learn even better than those they served.
I have taken an oath upon me, a covenant of my forefathers. I cannot partake of such meats or wine.
Nor can I. Nor I, Lord.
This story suggests there is something to the religious practice. But even among the many mainstream religions of various Christian creeds, there hasn't been an inspired health code as comprehensive and forward-thinking since the Law of Moses, perhaps not until the Mormon Word of Wisdom. Found in a book of prophecies called the Doctrine and Covenants, section 89, the Word of Wisdom is a concise 21 verses long. 8 of those verses are dedicated to explanation and blessings for those who keep these sayings, and just 13 verses are left and dedicated to the actual body of doctrine. How does 13 short verses impact our health and safety today? The doctrine instructs that all wholesome herbs God has ordained for the constitution, nature, and use of man, every herb in the season thereof, and every fruit in the season thereof, all these to be used with prudence and thanksgiving. We are told that meat, the flesh of beasts and fowl, birds, have likewise been authorized by God for the use of men, with thanksgiving. Also that all grains are good for the use of men and for beasts and birds. This is a good summary of what the doctrine says we can and should eat, but they also come with some particular caveats. For example, meat should be used sparingly, and also that it is even pleasing to God when meat is not used except in times of cold or famine, but that always it should be used with thanksgiving. Grain also is limited, perhaps more heavily limited than meat. An entire verse is dedicated specifically to this one product and its many varieties used commonly in the world today. Verse 15 states explicitly, that grains are made for man only in times of famine or excess of hunger. We use grain in just about everything we eat. Grains are ubiquitous in our society and the world at large, particularly in all developed nations. Why then should we only use them in times of great hunger? For now, let's put that question aside and address a few other aspects we haven't yet covered.
Kate, you know the famous story about Emma objecting to the tobacco spit and smoke that filled her house, which was in the building where they met. But there was a lot more going on beside that to catalyze this revelation. What were some of the other things that led to it?
In a way, it was God responding both to Emma's individual concern and to the concerns of the broader American culture. They talked a lot about what was good for you and what was bad for you. So this revelation didn't come out of a vacuum. And during one of their meetings, Joseph Smith came out of his translation room and he said, "I just received this revelation." And it was the word of wisdom. And he read it to them, and they were very enthusiastic. They started making their own copies and disseminating those copies around town, and people immediately started complying. They gave up alcohol, tea, and coffee right away, a lot of them.
As with other religious health codes, there are some prohibitions to remember. Alcohol is a common complaint among many religions. Much less so is the use of tobacco. Both are expressly prohibited by the word of wisdom. Twice the instruction is given, "Strong drink is not for the belly, but for the washing of your bodies." For tobacco, it is written, "Not for the body, neither for the belly, but for bruises and sick cattle." Then there is one more, verse 9. "Hot drinks are not for the body or belly." An entire verse dedicated to one short point, set apart from the rest as if meant to stand out so that we might take notice. So then, what is the significance, if any? Most members of the Church of Jesus Christ actually do a very good job following most of this doctrine, obscured to the rest of the world. Members go to lengths to avoid alcohol or even the appearance of drinking or smoking tobacco and other herbs. They do not indulge in hot drinks, which they identify as coffee and tea. Most Latter-day Saints, if but few very educated members of the health and science industry, can actually tell you why it is important beyond a spiritual decree, and by what mechanisms the word of wisdom has in the process of temporal salvation in these latter days. You have probably heard of the many benefits of coffee or tea. Green tea has especially been lauded as a health drink with healing properties and dietary value. You have probably never heard of the detriment it may cause. It's no surprise. The coffee and tea industry is projected to retail at almost $70 billion in just the U.S. over the next 2 years. In comparison, the tobacco industry
US $55 billion in 2018.
They were at one time able to convince the world that tobacco was good for you. They even managed to persuade medical doctors that smoking for women during pregnancy was healthy. It took a long time for the truth of the matter to be exposed and for health experts to get on board. And even still, it is a strong industry in all countries that know better.
But shares in companies listed in the Bloomberg Tobacco Producers Index have risen 351% since 2009. That makes it one of the best investments of the past decade.
So what of tea and coffee? Unfortunately, there are still many unknowns and much speculation with incomplete science. But new information is coming about each day, and we have the benefit of knowing far more than we did even 10 years ago. As for these details about to be uncovered, not one of them was known in the 1800s when this doctrine was recorded.
I have a letter from a man who made a suggestion concerning what subject I should address at conference. This man said he felt I'd spoken too many times concerning the word of wisdom and strongly urged me to speak on a different topic. President Grant continued, "That is one man who obviously needs to hear more about the word of wisdom, and therefore I shall address that topic tonight." And he did so.
Both tea and coffee are filled with thousands of chemicals, among them caffeine, tannin, and other chemicals such as chlorogenic acid are key factors in nutritional deficiencies. This is apparent when we consider the effects of these drinks on youth and infants. It has been well established by the health and science community that women who drink coffee and tea during pregnancy have smaller and underweight children, often ending up in the bottom 10% for height and weight. Much of our Western country is already deficient in healthy fats due to a societal shift away from fats during the 1980s, which popularized low-fat products like milk, yogurt, and processed foods. This low-fat problem, combined with stimulants found in tea and coffee, which further deplete body resources, has far-reaching impacts on our health. If you don't have enough fat, then you aren't able to absorb and use fat-soluble vitamins, such as vitamins A, K, E, and D. Over time, this condition leads to cognitive impairments, bone disease, eye problems, cardiovascular disease, skin problems, and will impair your immune system, leaving you more vulnerable to bacterial and viral infection. Not only that, but these particular drinks are also known as mild diuretics. They force your body to eliminate waste at a much faster rate. More frequent elimination means your body has less time to absorb important vitamins and nutrients, especially all the water-soluble vitamins, which are all the B vitamins and vitamin C. These drinks, coffee and tea, are known to deplete the body of important minerals like zinc, iron, calcium, and magnesium. Additionally, some of these chemicals, as those already mentioned, have a specific effect on depleting your body's stores of vitamin B1, known as thiamine. This vitamin is particularly important in nerve function and a cofactor in metabolism. According to the National Library of Medicine, symptoms of thiamine deficiency are nonspecific and may be easily attributed to a number of disease processes. Unrelenting or uncharacteristic fatigue, changes in mood with a tendency towards hyperirritability and mood lability are common. A sense of mental fuzziness and subtle decrements in memory are often reported, along with loss of appetite, sleep disturbances such as nightmares, and or gastrointestinal discomfort and dysmobility. Food intolerance and vomiting may develop as the deficiency progresses. Thiamine deficiency has connections with type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, autism, behavioral disorders, including Tourette's, ADD, ADHD, and OCD. It is connected with sudden infant death syndrome, and also beriberi, dementia, schizophrenia, anxiety, and depression. When we understand how this vitamin affects everything with the nervous system and metabolism, the link between all these conditions becomes obvious. Symptoms tend to mimic other conditions and are frequently misdiagnosed or overlooked entirely. It's easy to point out the abundance of research studies citing the benefits of drinks such as coffee and tea. They're plant-based, so they have many phytonutrients, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory properties, and can be used as a treatment for skin and some digestive disorders. All businesses seek to promote their business in the best light. Big Tobacco did the same thing for 100 years. It's not that coffee or tea doesn't have these benefits. They do, but you have to balance out the other effects against the good. Not everything that comes from the earth is good for you, and many substances can become toxic due to environment and processing. Tea, for example, needs an acidic environment and popularly comes from countries with polluted soil. Soil often contaminated with lead, aluminum, arsenic, and fluoride are common in many teas, which absorb the heavy metals from the soil they grow in, as well as dozens of types of pesticides, most of which are illegal but subject to little scrutiny in corrupt countries where a bribe is all it takes to pass an inspection, or where no oversight is the unfortunate standard. Then there is the packaging, where many tea bags are bleached with epichlorohydrin, a known carcinogen. Saying that tea or coffee is good for you has similarities to the old fallacies of food and drink. Wine must be good for you because it's made from grapes which have antioxidants. This ignores the fact that you are still drinking poison, which attacks your liver, depletes vitamins and minerals from the body, and is a cofactor in many diseases and connected with high mortality rates. But sure, wine has some health benefits. Benefits which you can get from many other sources without any of the downsides of alcohol. The same is true for tea and for coffee. Other plant-based infusions have just as many benefits and often greater effects than those you get from the tea leaf or the coffee bean. But industry leaders don't want you to know that. An interesting effect to consider is how they act as a diuretic.
It's one of the most consumed beverages in the world. Coffee is a mild diuretic. It makes you pee more, makes you excrete more fluid.
Researchers have never been quite sure what function chemicals like caffeine play in the plant that produce it, but some speculate it may act as an herbicide to prevent competition from other plants around them.
Caffeine is produced by more than 80 species of plants, and the reason may well be survival. As it turns out, caffeine is a biological poison used by plants as a pesticide. The caffeine gives seeds and leaves a bitter taste, which discourages their consumption by insects and animals. If predators persist in eating a caffeine-containing plant, the caffeine can cause central nervous system disruptions, which is not to say that coffee is impervious to insects. On the contrary, the modern agricultural practice of growing coffee plants in dense plantations fosters the development of insect infestations. Enormous amounts of chemical pesticides and herbicides are then applied to control those infestations. In fact, coffee is the most heavily sprayed food or beverage commodity on the face of the earth.
Regardless of the purpose, the only reason your body works to rapidly expel substances from the digestive tract is to get rid of substances that are causing harm or pose a danger. Medicine has not identified many specific reasons coffee may be bad for you, but your body knows something medicine does not. And it is amazing that the knowledge that coffee can have detrimental effects on the development of a human fetus, effects that will carry on through the child's life, and still modern medicine cannot bring itself to admit there is harm being done. It is amazing that some researchers point to coffee and tea consumption as having less risk of diabetes, mortality, and some cancers, but ignore the fact that depletion of nutritional content from one's diet plays a direct role in the reduction of health and quality of life. The fact that these drinks have a strong impact, contributing to nutritional deficiencies responsible for causing numerous disease, continues to be ignored, because the various diseases have not been linked to coffee or tea directly, even though contribution to health problems is apparent in the use of these drinks. It is difficult to cover all of the problems, but there is at least one other that warrants discussion. One of the common effects of both tea and coffee are jitters, now largely associated with the fungus commonly found on both tea and coffee. The fungus produces myotoxins, which affect the central nervous system and are damaging to internal organs.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket to make Moldy, the documentary, to document what mold toxins do to people. Most world governments have standards for this because it's so dangerous, and the EU in the last 10 years tightened their standards because it's worth doing for their population, but the US has no standards. Mark Inman, former head of the Specialty Coffee Association, saying, "I was in the room in 2008 when the Japanese trade minister rejected 1,000 containers of coffee that was too moldy for Japanese people to drink." And I said, "Mark, what happened to the coffee?" He said, "They sent it to America."
Do you think in 20 years from now we're going to look back on mold the same way we look back on doctors who were smoking Lucky Strikes, and the same way we looked at pregnant mothers having martinis, and we're going to hit ourselves in the heads and say, what the hell are we thinking?
Absolutely, we're going to do that. And there are major connections between mold and fertility, and I see this all the time. Mold in your food makes you just feel crappy, and if you eat low levels of these toxins in your food all the time, it actually causes damage to your body. And the toxin that's present in coffee is also present in a lot of grain, as well as some other toxins. This is that ochratoxin A.
Consuming tea and coffee leads to many physical, neurological, and behavioral problems. It is an indirect cause, produced by depriving your body of many vitamins and nutrients required for healthy functions, development, and resiliency. It occurs over time and remains a silent risk to everyone who partakes. But there is at least one more aspect of this issue we have to address. The specific wording from the Doctrine and Covenants is that hot drinks are not for the belly. The hot drinks of Joseph Smith's time were coffee and tea. But could there be something more we need to learn by such a broad statement? What problems may exist from hot drinks specifically? As it turns out, countries that consume high volume of hot drinks have a much higher rate of throat and stomach cancer. It seems that hot drinks have a burn effect on the sensitive and unprotected tissues of the inner body. These repeated burns, even mild as they may be, have the effect of causing compounding damage to cells and their DNA. An injury repeated often enough can lead to cancer, and so the prohibition on hot drinks, any hot drink, becomes clear. It's not just about the depleted nutrition, the toxins, tannins, heavy metals. It's not about the corruption or faulty, incomplete science. It's that hot drinks damage your body, and it's just that simple. Now, many of you may start to wonder, could it be that Mormons don't understand their own law of health? And is it possible that most, maybe the majority of Mormons aren't even following this doctrine as it is written? I think it's obvious that most members of the faith may be very good at staying away from coffee or tea, but how many of them have packets of hot cocoa in their cupboards, or herbal tea, or some other hot beverage for a cold day? And not only that, what of the rest of the word of wisdom that is being overlooked entirely? Latter-day Saints don't actually follow most of the word of wisdom, and to be fair, the doctrine is written as a warning to the saints. It is not written as a commandment. To be sent greeting, not by commandment or constraint, but by revelation and the word of wisdom, showing forth the order and will of God in the temporal salvation of all saints in the last days. So it is not a sin, but members are restricted from attending temple worship if they are not keeping to a few key aspects of the word of wisdom. No coffee, tea, alcohol, or tobacco. However, they can still drink herbal tea or other hot drinks like hot cocoa and hot apple cider. Even though the doctrine warns against hot drinks, they can still drink soda with high amounts of high fructose sugar, even though it metabolizes in the body the same as alcohol. They can still eat meat every day and consume large amounts of processed grain to the detriment of their health, and yet hold a temple recommend. But these points should not be looked at by outsiders as valid criticism of the Church. It is a curiosity, but not an unusual circumstance, since all of us are equal victims of our food industry. Most of the world does not know how bad fructose in soda drinks is for the body, or have any knowledge that it does the same to the liver as alcohol. Most of the world does not have much respect for animal life to think about cultivating some reservation about meat consumption, let alone to practice gratitude when eating it. Most of the world has been consuming cheap grains with almost no nutritional value for generations. This causes all sorts of disease, but all these things are common and readily available. The Latter-day Saints can hardly be faulted for eating food that is available when better sources are scarce or non-existent. Unfortunately, following these other aspects of the word of wisdom may be quite difficult without access to a personal farm. Many members do cultivate a community of self-reliance and independence, and so also supplement much of their diet with food raised by their own hands. So there is a significant number who do strive to live this teaching to the best of their ability and are successful. But not everyone can do this, and so we see many members of the LDS community who are very unhealthy, much like the rest of the population of the world, who are obese, diabetic, depressed, cancerous, and otherwise afflicted because of diet. What are the key factors contributing to this national epidemic? We must return to verse 15 and the question of grains, which should only be used in times of famine or great hunger. And why? The simple point of the matter is that grains, pastas, breads, baked goods, cereals, sugars, and other carbohydrates are the primary cause of every major illness in modern society. The top 4 epidemics in America are heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and dementia, all attributed to our diet rich in processed grains.
The main features of the American diet gone bad is too many refined grains, and we'll say next, too much sugar. And I would say in general that for those of us who pay attention to what we're eating and read labels and go to high quality food stores and the like, that this is one of the harder tasks to accomplish.
100 years ago, these conditions were rare. Eating these foods, void of almost any nutritional value, makes you fat and sick. There is a reason you don't see too many overweight individuals in their 60s. Most don't make it that far or become bedridden. It is interesting to note that many common foods in the United States are banned by other countries such as Australia, the UK, and Canada. Why? Consider the healthcare systems in those countries. They are government subsidized. Those governments tax the population to fund the medical industry, but they want to keep as much of that money as possible by reducing illness. The quickest way to do that is to restrict food that cause disease. However, in the United States, healthcare is paid for by the citizens directly. It is a $2.1 trillion industry, representing almost 20% of the entire US GDP. In other words, healthcare is big money in the US. Everything from the government, the doctors, the FDA, and more are actually financially incentivized to keep a large portion of the population a little bit sick.
Overall, there's very little in today's healthcare system's architecture to incentivize practitioners broadly to actively prevent the appearance of a disease in the first place and to limit the procedures applied to a patient to the most effective options.
Doctors today do not practice medicine. They practice pharmacology and have abandoned the value of the Hippocratic Oath they take. They know almost nothing about diet and nutrition. I mentioned that the word of wisdom was given as a warning and not a command. But a warning of what? In verse 4 we learn the purpose behind the word of wisdom. Behold, verily thus saith the Lord unto you, in consequence of evils and designs which do and will exist in the hearts of conspiring men in the last days, I have warned you and forewarn you by giving unto you this word of wisdom by revelation. And it all makes sense, a frightening amount of sense. But the evil and conspiring men so mentioned implicate a dozen industries and regulating bodies of the federal government. It implicates the food industry, run by monopolies we are supposed to be protected from, who are run themselves by the tobacco industry.
In 1985, tobacco giant R.J. Reynolds bought Nabisco Foods. Tobacco pioneer Philip Morris bought General Foods and 3 years later, Kraft Foods, making them the largest food producer in North America. And leaving the business of food in the capable hands of the same corporations who helped addict us to tobacco. Using the same tactics they used to promote tobacco, food companies set about peddling the entire planet a diet of processed goods, loaded with chemicals and additives, masquerading as food. This new machine operates with specific targets in mind, like addicting consumers, without them knowing it.
The industry leaders pivoted to food manufacturing and employed all the same dirty practices of the tobacco industry to food processing, creating cheap, highly palatable, addictive processed foods from grains, void of nutrition. Then the drug companies come in to deal with rising health problems, creating drugs that further deplete the body of nutrition and causing added health concerns, and then new drugs to deal with the problems they created. They collude with regulatory agencies, insurance companies, and lobbyists to strong-arm the healthcare system and restrict information to doctors who go on to prescribe debilitating medications until the patients have nothing left to pass on when they die. In fact, 2/3 of all bankruptcies are caused by medical bills in the United States. So the healthcare system is complicit in the deterioration of U.S. health and an accomplice in the transfer of generational wealth from the working classes into corporate industries who go on to use that wealth to influence and degrade government, garnering more control and power for themselves, making each generation more weak, less free, more controllable, more dependent, and more poor. This is the evil and design of the conspiring men in the last days. This is the warning of the word of wisdom and of the prophet who penned it. We can live long and healthy lives even in today's world, but we cannot rely on government.
I regret very much that what we intended to do, which is to make sure that everybody is moving into better plans because they want them as opposed to because they're forced into it. And I am sorry.
Regulating bodies.
The nation's top health agency admitting failures and promising change after a scathing, internally initiated review, saying, to be frank, we are responsible for some pretty dramatic, pretty public mistakes, from testing to data to communications.
And thousands of emails showing that Tony Fauci knew from the beginning that COVID may have been manufactured in China in dangerous experiments he helped pay for. So why did they lie to us about it for so long?
The healthcare system or doctors to help us.
The third leading cause of death in the United States is due to mistakes made by doctors and other healthcare professionals. Those errors usually aren't added to death certificates.
We found that 250,000 patients in the United States alone die from medical care gone awry.
You have to take your health into your own hands. You have to educate yourself if you want to come out ahead. We can learn so much from just a little understanding of 13 short verses. The Mormons of today would do well to follow their doctrine better, and we would all do so much better by following their example. Do not consume hot beverages. Do not consume coffee and tea. Avoid all processed grains and limit your intake of meat and grains in general. Do not use tobacco or other herbs for smoking or chewing. Use healthy fruits and vegetables in their season. Consume healthy fats and avoid the toxic oxidized fats found in vegetable oils, the inflammatory omega-6 fatty acids, and trans fats. Do not consume cereals and baked goods from the store. If you follow this charge, the doctrine promises all saints who remember to keep and do these things, walking in obedience to the commandments, shall receive health in their navel and marrow in their bones. They shall find wisdom and great treasures of knowledge, even hidden treasures. They shall run and not be weary, and shall walk and not faint. None of this information was available in the time of Joseph Smith. He recorded Section 89 when the understanding of health and medicine was so much different. This likely made Mormons stand out even more among other citizens, creating further division and prejudice against them. And yet, Joseph was right. These verses are a valuable guide for all of mankind. Joseph was either a genius or inspired.